Okay. We're gonna get started here. My name is Reiser, and I'm the Cavalier County Extension Agent. If you did not get a book, I'm gonna be referencing a little bit in the new week guides over there. They look like this. You don't have to take it, you can get it at the end, but I'll be doing this, mentioning a couple other books, and then also doing PowerPoint and some else. I was an A teacher, I guess, the last, or 2 years before, the last year and a half. So the teaching is kind of my background, so that's why I decided to do the weed ID, since there's a lot we can always learn about weeds, right? So let's see this. Okay. And then I have 2 other resources, so if you don't want to take a book, there is a QR code on that side for the little book, and then this one is a pocket guide, and the right side is the newer version that you have in your hand. And some of the weed ID characteristics that we'll go over today are common lamb's quarter, common tansy, field bindweed. Then we'll compare a little bit of leafy spurge, mare's tail, and kochia side by side, the foxtails, and wild oat. If we get time, we'll come back to the thistles. Those ones can be a little tricky. Palmer amaranth and water hemp, and then Powell amaranth and red root pigweed. Does anyone have any questions to start out with of why I chose these ones?
Aside before you showed 2, did you say that somewhere in the book?
Yep, so this one is the book that you have in your hand, and then this is the older version.
So is that in English?
No, the QR code isn't. So you can scan that with your phone, but it's the same thing you have in your hand, it's just the digital copy.
Okay. Downloadable to your phone?
Yeah. You can Google it and it should come up, like if you type in the identification and control of noxious weeds, NDSU, it'll be like one of the first ones that pops up. But if you want me to wait a second, I can leave it up there. And then going off of me asking you a question, I have a question for you. Who struggles with identifying weeds? Okay. Who wishes that they were just a little bit better, but think they have it under the wraps? Okay. Who's confident that they're good at identifying weeds? So I think weeds can change a lot depending on the environment that they're in. They can have different biotypes and different characteristics that make you think that they're an opposite one, kind of like water hemp and palmer. And we're going to kind of go through this list, and I kind of picked these ones as they're the most common that we'll see. Obviously, earlier you were mentioning like common burdock, and then there's curly dock and all of those too. But I had to pick enough to get through in a half hour. So the first one is common lamb's quarter, and I don't know if the lights, they're probably going to make it a little hard to see. But it's a summer annual. It'll be kind of one of those first ones that kind of comes up. And you'll notice the silvery backside with the serrated leaves. It'll have this little C kind of cut in the sides. And then this is a kochia next to a common lamb's quarter. So you'll notice that the kochia has the little fine hairs, and it's almost that velvety texture, whereas the lamb's quarter is more of a succulent texture. This plant can produce 70 to 500,000 seeds per plant, so it's one of those ones. I had a question come into our office this fall that this guy was driving through, he's from a native North Dakotan, and he goes, "What is this crop that they're planting? It looks awful." And it was like a whole hedge, like sprayed out, dead, almost harvested lamb's quarter. It was just along the highway. And I was like, oh, it's probably common lamb's quarter. And then I, zoomed in and looked, and I'm like, yeah, it's common lamb's quarter. Off the picture he texted me. But he was just like, that's an ugly crop. I'm like, well, it's not supposed to be a crop. But it emerges throughout the growing season. So that flush that he saw was kind of that second flush that came in July or August, as well as the first flush that was there from this following spring. And pre and post emerging herbicides are kind of the best way to control this plant, as well as tillage if you want to do some light tillage of the smaller plants. Common tansy, have any of you guys seen this around your area? So up in Cavalier County, and I guess in Foster County, so I noticed this one in high school. My dad, we have our mailbox, and it's an old farmyard. And right by the mailbox, there's these little bushes of pretty yellow flowers. And they haven't really really spread. I think they bounced maybe one little cluster in a ditch on the other side of the driveway. But when I started in Cavalier County, I was driving to Rolla for teaching. So I started in Cavalier County and I would drive the rest of the county. And almost all the coulees, pasture lands, water life management areas, you'll find common tansy. It's an ornamental that escaped cultivation, and it's pretty aggressive. So the last 3 years I've been hunting on some of the public land in Cavalier County up in the gorge, and every year I see more and more of this because it just bunches and spreads and spreads and spreads. So July and August you'll see whole hills and valleys of yellow flowers, and at first I was like, oh, that's a lot of leafy spurge, until I walked up and looked at it. And I'm like, okay, it's not leafy spurge. It's a little bit brighter.
I'll add a note here, because that has a strong odor.
Yep.
It was by our outhouse. That was commonly planted by outhouses. Nasty odor.
Yeah, and you'll definitely smell it. Also, another thing is, if you want to get rid of it, the best way is to there is chemical control methods as well, but by pulling it, you just don't want to use your bare hands because the toxins will give you a rash. One of our weed control officer pulled a bunch of it and carried it on his chest kind of, and he had a rash on his belly, even through his shirt. So just make sure that you don't, you wear the proper clothing and, dispose of it the right way. But it is a really aggressive invader, and I always forget to take pictures when I see it because it's just so common. And now it's growing around like a bunch of farmyards. You'll see it around the trees. You'll see it by the telephone poles, and it's throughout the county. So it's just one I wanted to bring to attention. If you do see it, it'll have those fern-like leaves and then these little button flowers that are in the little clusters at the top.
So it's.
It shouldn't, but I'd have to look at it again. And I have some books that I'll reference that go a little bit more in depth of each species as well. The next three, and at the end of this, I'm hoping we have time to kind of look at some mounts, but we're going to kind of compare the next three. So field bindweed is one that we often see growing along the field edges or in our fields. There's also wild buckwheat and hedge bindweed that we'll talk about. But it's a creeping perennial with heart-shaped leaves. It's introduced from Europe. People plant morning glories. It's in that family. And it causes lodging and shades out the plants. I walked in a pea field this fall that the peas weren't even, they lodge themselves sometimes, but they weren't even standing up because there was so much field bindweed and wild buckwheat in that field that it just caused the yield loss there. And then control, you can do cultivation or selective herbicides such as dicamba, tordon, or glyphosate. We'll usually take care of this one.
Well, farmers call that creeping Jenny.
Yeah, creeping Jenny. So when I see creeping Jenny or morning glory on the little seed packets that people get from the store, I'm like, yeah, don't plant that. but anyway, so that's field bindweed, hedge bindweed, and wild buckwheat. So hedge bindweed, you'll notice that there's five points on the leaf. Right here, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you'll have more of a heart-shaped leaf for wild buckwheat. And when we look at the mounts on the field bindweed, you'll see it's more of a spade. It'll have kind of the 3 points, but it'll have a spade shape with a rounded tip. So I'm trying to kind of cruise through. 30 minutes is kind of a small bit of time. But so there's that picture again, and those ones are similar control methods to the field bindweed. I'm going too fast too. Just shout it out. It's easy to click through. So leafy spurge is another one we commonly see. It's a perennial, and it spreads pretty aggressively if it's not controlled. The roots can grow 15 feet or more in depth, and then they form dense clusters. I've also heard that even a section of the root will regrow back. So if you get an inch left, that will regrow. So you want to try to get it all if you can. There's also the flea beetles for the biological control methods. If it's in a pasture or a range you can't get to with a four-wheeler or ATV or anything like that. The stems emerge in early April, and then the seeds that are produced that year can be viable for up to 8 years. And when we look at the seeds, there'll be a little olive-shaped looking seed, and then the leaves are alternating opposite, and they'll be all the same length. And then whereas the next one, we'll go over the next three that kind of look alike as the seedling and compare them. So kochia is one that when we look at them side by side, kochia, mare's tail, and leafy spurge, they can kind of be deceiving unless you know what you're looking for. So kochia is the drought resistant one. We call them the tumbleweeds. And they're also very fuzzy as seedlings, and they're in that little uniform rosette with different sizes of leaves is what you'll notice on that one compared to leafy spurge. And it's been found to be resistant to certain herbicides. Last year, if any of you heard Joe Eichley and Brian Jenks talk about the resistances that we had, there's a whole article you can read on it, and it's kind of widespread throughout North Dakota. It's highly adaptable, so it can grow on anything from the bare salt ground that we have to a pasture or a driveway. I'll give you a funny story. My husband goes duck hunting. Who goes duck hunting in here, or goose hunting? Raise your hands. So, as a tip from a wife, do not stuff your blind with kochia. And bring it back to my rock pad. So now every year I have to hand pull the baby kochias after I spray it because that's the only thing that comes back. And I still have not blown out the back garage because I don't want it in my lawn. So that's my tip if you're a duck hunter. But do not stuff your blinds with kochia, even if that's the only thing in the field. And if you do, leave it there. But it's highly adaptable and can grow in a rock pad. And then there's means of chemical control that I'll reference in a little bit. And this is just the adult version of it. You can have the different kind of biotypes where it's the slimy green with a little bit of a red stem, or the darker green with that red stem. And as it grows, the fuzziness will kind of go down or go away as it gets taller. And it'll start to branch more, as you can see in the pictures. So mare's tail is an interesting one too. It's a native and an annual. And I first saw this when I worked at NDSU in the weed science department. There was a grad student doing some studies on how to control this weed. And I saw some that were like the one down here where it has the slender, long leaves. And then I also saw some like the ones that Jeff Stockler took, where they have that little serration and that obsolete leaves, where they get skinnier and then they get wider towards the end. They have one main stem and they're usually whorled. They don't usually branch unless they have some type of mechanical damage or some chemical damage. They're very, very small seeds, and when we turn the lights on, I have some vials. I opened up a ice cream pail when I was organizing the weed seeds at NDSU, and they went everywhere. It's one that if you let it get to seed, it's going to go everywhere just by the little, like the breath of our breath or whatever. But it is one that is very hard to control in the southeast. There a little bit more. And I've seen a little bit up in our area, but not as bad as that way. And here's a picture that Jeff Stockler took this one, and it was rounded up soybeans, and that was a resistant mare's tail, or not horseweed. Mare's tail horseweed. And then the other one was just a picture I found online. Typically, this is what I see up in Lane with the skinny leaves and just the little white poofy head. But his were that wider leafed, and you can't really see it because of the control, the burn here. And then we have some grassy weeds. Who's all familiar with wild oats? So in Langdon, we have a really big problem with our wild oats because they can live for 10 years. The seed bank can be built up if you don't control that right away. And it's an invader introduced from Europe. It's an annual, and it grows almost anywhere. I found it in ditches, I found it in fields, in rocks, everywhere. And then you'll have the dangling spikelets with the kinked black on or lighter colored on. It can be for, and I'll show you that on the mounts in a little bit. And then the seedling leaves twist counterclockwise and bend at a 90-degree angle. So if you're looking in a wheat field and you notice that counterclockwise twist and the bend, then you can be for sure it's wild oats. There's also little hairs by the ligule, which is by the collar, that you'll notice as well. So this is kind of the picture of that ligule and the hairs. You'll kind of see them on the stem. Sometimes they'll have them, most of the time they'll have them, and then they'll have that really pronounced ligule, which is the white part. And then you'll notice these awns, when they go to seed, they'll kink versus your normal oat that we grow for a crop. And then you'll have that counterclockwise twisting leaves. my buttons. And then we have green and yellow foxtail. These are often called your pigeon grasses. We have their summer annuals, and they grow anywhere as well. I found them in my yard too. Yellow foxtail will have the yellow hairs on the seed head, as well as having pubescent hairs around the collar or ligule. So like right down, if this one had a leaf, right down at that collar, you would see the hairs that are pretty pronounced. And the green foxtail, it doesn't have hairs on that collar or ligule, and it will have the green hairs on the head. And with the yellow foxtail, the seeds are more of that bigger yellow half egg shape, whereas your green foxtail, they can be anywhere from green to brown, and they're smaller, like way smaller than the yellow foxtail. Water hemp, this is a picture from Cavalier County in a ditch in August, end of September, and it was taller than me. I didn't see it until I was driving down, so like somebody said earlier, they grow by the water, kind of by the cattails. So I didn't notice it as I was driving my routes until then. They can grow to 6 feet or taller. I'm 5'11", so that one was definitely taller than me. It can cause 40 to 70% yield loss in your soybeans, while polymer is up to 79% loss. And I wish I would have put the picture on here, but my dad sent one from Foster County, a picture of a field that was infested with water hemp, and you could barely see the soybeans. So it definitely can get out of control. It has wide genetic variety, as well as having a lot of scattered resistances or susceptibilities. I sent in some samples that were a mile apart from that water hemp and one that was just to the east a little bit, and they were alternating resistances and susceptibilities to PPO, ALS, and there was one other one. I'll show it on the screen at the end, but it was resistant and susceptible. And that one was used through the genotyping center, the National Genotyping Center. So if you go to your extension agent, if they have any pamphlets left, they sent out that you can get ID pamphlets that will tell you what they're resistant to and the proper ID as well. Early detection and ID is key, so you want to spray it when it's 4 inches or under. And in that little book that you guys picked up, it should have all of the updated for this coming year's what would work on it, as well as using your weed guide when they come out. Okay, so on here with water hemp, you'll notice, the first thing you'll notice is shiny leaves and a smooth stem. As we get going, I'll have Palmer and Powell on here, and these three can be very similar looking. You'll notice this has green stems, that one has red stems. They were literally like 10 feet apart. So it just shows the difference of the biotypes. They're also male and female plants and dioecious, so they will look different that way. But you'll really notice the pointy leaf, that lanceolate looking leaf with the shininess and no hairs. So I keep forgetting to push my buttons. But and then that red stem, I had one that was mowed over, and then there was one just a little, like I said, a little bit down that was more red than the other ones. And then this is another picture. So as you can see back here, the cattails are there. They're taller than the cattails in this ditch. And they were just scattered in a couple clusters along the highway. I didn't see any in the field, but last year, the people that went through, they were just by Milton, and they had some in their field, and it's recommended that you hand pull it and then burn it or bury it. So put it in a garbage bag. Don't just drive away with your side-by-side at them in the back. These ones are all going to seed, so I tried to pull as many as I can. Some of the farmers got on their four-wheelers and went and pulled them and burned them. But that's the best kind of control that we can do unless you can spray them little. And that farmer that pulled theirs in their field, they didn't have any this year. So if you can get ahead of it, if you see 1 or 2 plants, get rid of them, put them in a bag, burn them. That's one of the best ways you can get ahead of it. So as you can see on the top right corner, you'll see the long, slender leaf. You can still kind of tell it's a pigweed, but it'll have a longer leaf. And then down here, these ones are longer, and then they'll have that rounder leaf that starts to show the definition of that little egg shape.
Is this native?
No, I believe not. Or yeah, no, it's not.
No.
It's introduced. So Palmer Amaranth is a summer annual as well. And as you can notice, that picture also has long seed heads, just like, I'm gonna go back a little bit, just like that one. So when you're trying to identify these, there's a couple things that we need to look for. And I handed out, there's a paper on the back table that has other characteristics as well. So these can grow 6 to 8 feet tall as well. They can have a white V shape on the leaf. On my next slide, I'll show that. Or they'll have a little pin prick, a little pin mark at the end of the leaf. There's new adaptations and resistances that are developing throughout the state and throughout the United States. And they're also dioecious with male and female plants. And then also early detection and identification is key on this one as well. You'll also notice the long petiole right here. It will fold, if you fold it here, it'll be longer than the leaf. With water hemp, it'll be shorter than the leaf if you fold this petiole. You'll notice this is our agent from Trail County. That's her hand next to it, so you'll notice that petiole is almost longer than her fingers. And you'll have more of that egg or like a pointed egg-shaped leaf on that one, whereas the water hemp is usually skinny and shiny. This one, they're more dull for Palmer. And they're still, water hemp and Palmer are still smooth stems, whereas your redroot pigweed and Powell will have hairs. But Powell, as it grows, loses its hairs. So that's why they can be kind of tricky. And here's another picture of Palmer. So this one kind of looks like the water hemp, but you'll notice that really long petiole. Usually the seed heads are more of they're more stiff, if you would say that, or that's a good term, whereas the Powell and water hemp are a little more spiky. And then here's a picture of that white V. Usually on pictures that you look in like Iowa or all the other states, they'll have a distinct V. That's just a different biotype where those ones don't have it. And these are from North Dakota, these pictures are.
West of Lyman?
No, it's just been water hemp and Powell. And I'll show a picture of the Powell that looks like it, but it's not that. So this is another picture. So these fields have been sprayed. That's why the Palmer looks a little bit scraggly, is it still didn't die. Didn't desiccate it. It just did some damage. So redroot pigweed is a native. It's a summer annual. It has the pubescent leaves and stems, so the hair all the way up the plant on the leaves. And you'll notice that like little rough texture when you feel the leaf. The inflorescences are usually thick and bunched. And then they have an egg-shaped leaf, like a true egg-shaped leaf, with the prominent veins, white veins or veins on the leaf. So the picture up in the corner is a water hemp seedling compared to a redroot pigweed seedling. Sorry if I'm in your guys' way. And you'll kind of notice the shininess of that one versus the dullness of the redroot pigweed, the long leaves of the water hemp versus the egg shape of the redroot pigweed. Powell amaranth, this isn't the greatest picture, but I have a couple more after this, is also a native and a summer annual. So Powell and redroot are native, water hemp and Palmer are introduced pigweeds. These ones will also have an egg-shaped leaf, but it's more of a wider at the bottom and kind of goes to a point versus having the actual rounded point at the end. It can get about 2 meters tall, so not as tall as the other ones, and they'll have different biotypes and characteristics. And then they'll have the fine pubescent hairs towards the bottom, and as they grow, as they get taller, they lose that, and they'll have more of a smooth stem, unless it's by the newest growth or the oldest growth. And those hairs, yeah, they'll keep fading. So it's one of those ones I had to get out my magnifying glass, not on this picture, on, oops.
Look for the runners and look for the hairs. Most people misidentify this as redroot pigweed.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people, if you're spraying redroot pigweed and you're not killing it, chances are it's not redroot pigweed.
Yeah. So this picture was in a dry bean field, and you couldn't even you could see barely the strips of the dry beans, and it was just all that size. And it was a little bit interesting, and that was up towards the northeast corner of Cavalier County, whereas this one was down by Loma, and this is still a Powell. I had to look for the hairs way up in here. And I got my magnifying glass. I have a little hand lens that has a light, and I did find hairs, but this part of the stem was relatively smooth, and it had been sprayed before on the Loma side, So it didn't have very many leaves that survived the chemical burns, but it was also very scraggly. And then you'll see kind of that egg-shaped leaf. The veins aren't as prominent on there as red root pigweed. And then this is a picture that's kind of hard to see, but the stem is very hairy. And that was the one that was up northeast of Langdon, and then this is the one that was west of Langdon. So you can notice that difference in variability in biotypes just in the same county.
There's a lot of this around Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
When you say it was sprayed, what was it sprayed?
I don't know. I'd have to ask either the weed board officer or the state
What
guys.
is supposed to be sprayed?
Probably, I
It's
don't
not
know.
glyphosate.
Yeah, no, not
Yeah, not
glyphosate.
glyphosate.
I did have a farmer that was out by Hannah, and he had sprayed
Pretty common.
glyphosate, and
There's
he
your
had
best bet on this
been
stuff, please.
It's Prees, yeah. Yeah, Prees is what I would say too. I'd have to look at the weed guide too, because trying to look at all these when I was making it gets kind of fuzzy. So one of the things that I can do for a tip is if you find a suspicious weed, the first thing that you could do is contact your weed board officer or extension agent. Do not pull the suspected, huh? Okay, do not pull the suspected weed and then take pictures and mark the GPS coordinates, have them come look at it. Or you can, don't bring it in the case it's water hemp, you don't want to spread the seeds. So just take pictures and send it to us. And then we'll work together to try to identify it, talk to our specialist, and then get you the results that you need. And good quality pictures are key in the pigweeds, and some other weeds, blurry pictures are not very helpful. And then there's the National Genotyping Center. So if you want sample kits for next year, I think they sent out 5 for this year that might be there. You can ask one of us, and we might have them in our office. Could you get the lights for a second? Okay, and I do have notes on here, so I'll be done unless anyone has questions. I know they'll be talking about the pigweeds at a different session for chemicals and stuff, or how to control it. But I do have notes if you want to know the difference between the mare's tail, leaf-spurge, and what else? And then there's a couple of common aloe and the pig and beauty box and stuff. So
Get your kids and grandkids to crop it and teach them all this stuff.
yeah, yeah. So I was hoping 30 minutes is a short time, but I do have the seeds up here and the mounts as well. There are CCA credits, so if you need to get the QR code, it's up here as well. And one other thing, there's the Weeds of the West is a good book, but this is the one I got this year, and I keep it in my car. It has all of the seedling pictures and the big plants. I keep it in my car all summer long. So those are my resources plus the little book I gave you.